Welcome to another episode of the Creative Power Hour. I'm your host, Marcus Whitney, and today's guest is the celestial, creative Caroline Randall Williams. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Celestial. I love that.
Yeah, that's how I think of you. That's how I think of you. I'm so excited. So I haven't shot a show in a minute. I've been doing public speaking, and we booked this probably, it feels like 2 months ago, and finally got the time.
It's been incubating for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning and I was like, today's the day. So can we jump into your origin story? Because I don't even think I really know it. I mean, I know you and I know your family, but I don't really know how
I would tell it?
Yeah, how would you tell it?
So my origin story probably starts, obviously it starts before me.
Yeah, right.
But I think when I think about my origin story, even to me and my own narrative, it starts with people who, I think about my great-grandfather Arna Bonta, who was a Harlem Renaissance poet, and he was the head librarian at Fisk and also their writer-in-residence for a long time. And he and his best friend was Langston Hughes, and now he died before I was born. But his wife, Alberta, lived till I was almost 17 years old, and just right over here in North Nashville, and was a really important part of my life. And my grandmother, Joan, his daughter, lived until I was, I think, 11, and also a really important part of my life. And so the idea of writing and rocking deep in the waters of the intersection between food and literature, like these librarians who cooked and were like these strong Black creative people here in Nashville, I feel like that's very much a part of my emotional and practical inheritance.
Yeah.
And really shaped who I planned to be as I was coming to be a human being. So I would say that's the sort of beginning of my origin story, is thinking about Arna Bonta, the legacy of that family. And then on my mom's side, obviously my mother is a writer. That's her bread and butter. It's her whole, she's multi-genre, which I think has led me to feel access to just leaping into different mediums, whether it be the article writing or the cookbook or poetry or getting on stage even with the poems. And her dad, George, the idea of him looms very large for me as part of my origin story. My grandfather, George, was born in Selma, Alabama, and he was the grandson of Edmund Pettus, the Confederate general.
Wow.
We don't have concrete evidence of that, except for that the Pettuses, many of them show up as my cousins on Ancestry DNA, so that's a thing.
Wow.
And they moved to Detroit, Great Migration stuff. And my grandfather was just this badass who ran dry cleaners, but who knows what else he was doing. And
And back then, people had a side gig.
Yeah. And he ran around with Berry Gordy and Berry Gordy's sister. And my mom was 5 years old when the Supremes first played the Copacabana. And she was there with my grandpa and my grandmother and all of these things. And so I think about that sort of, that's that side of Blackness.
Yeah, yeah.
The funk, the Motown,
Yeah.
the swing, the silk jacket, and maybe the pistol on the car seat next to you kind of thing.
Yeah, yes.
So I have this sense of George, this sense of Arna, this sense of Alice, this sense of Alberta. That's my great grandmother.
Okay.
When I think about my personal infrastructure, that's what comes to mind first as an origin story.
That's an unbelievable personal infrastructure. Most people can't.
I know.
Most people can't do that. Most people cannot go back and find themselves. As you were saying that, your picture got a lot clearer for me, because I think people who didn't know that would look at you and just be like, and also your mother, by the way, right? Because you both are still, she's in the game, right? You know what I mean? She's in the game.
She's in the game.
And you both are two things. One, incredibly prolific, and 2, really high energy, like all the time, right? It's like, when do y'all run out of energy, right? And
she's even better than I am about that.
Y'all are both incredible. And just hearing that makes me feel like there is definitely, what did you call it? Something inheritance. What did you call that?
An emotional and practical inheritance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Because I don't want to just say it's genetic. It's more than that, right? I mean, there's got to be narrative there, and just being around things when you were growing up that just all.
No, I think that's exactly right. And you think about one of the things that I think so much about, and hell hath frozen over, but one of the useful things about the current holder of the highest office in the land. Mm-hmm. And the way that his family functions, mm-hmm. is it's caused me to think a lot about inheritance and about legacy and about what wealth is and what passing things on means. And Black wealth can look like money. It can look like traditional white wealth, but it can also look like these things that I have, these stories that I have. I feel very wealthy because I have these narratives. And so to me, when I say inheritance, I use that word very intentionally because I think of it, like you come into your inheritance, you come into the things that allow you to have like capital in this world. Mm-hmm. And to me, those things allow me to have capital in this world. Those things are capital, like those stories, those memories, that kind of thing. So,
that's huge. Yeah. That is... Yeah, I won't even tell you like how much that just tapped into where I am in my life right now. My sons are 20 and 18.
I saw a college graduation picture, or a high school graduation picture.
Yeah. So my youngest is, thank you. Yeah, thank you. My youngest is getting ready to go to college, and I am so much thinking about that legacy and that inheritance, right, and that capital, and to be honest, they're both so capable. I'm not thinking about the monetary capital legacy, right? Inheritance for them. Yeah. I'm thinking about what example and what emotional and practical inheritance am I leaving them, right? And I'm thinking a lot about, and I'm thinking a lot about the one that my parents gave to me. Yeah. I mean, I just went to an event and did a public speaking thing, and I pretty much bring my parents with me into all of these stories now because it's like people just need to understand so much of who I am, we are, you have nothing to do with, right? You know what I'm saying? Like there's a whole part of everything you're doing that, yes, you are responsible for, your hard work and all that stuff. But look, you know what I mean? If you're fortunate enough, you got a lot. That's right. Right? That's right. Okay. Is there more? Because we could spend a lot of time talking about... More to the origin story? Yeah. Is there more? That was a lot, but there might be more. I guess I can condense the rest because that's like the foundation, and then I think that the rest, to me, all of these things provide really meaningful context, but then, all of that came together for Alice Randall and Avon Williams to have a child in 1987 here in this city. Mm-hmm. And, from all of my quirky, weird, creative activities that my mom did when I was a little girl, and then putting me through, watching her fight as a single mother to put me through university school and to like keep on making really important art. I grew up in a house where, my mother, this brilliant Black woman, was the sole breadwinner, and she did a good job at it. Yeah. And she also did a really good job at making me feel very seen and heard and invited into my own imagination. And, she always, from the cookbook to the poem, she was always like, mixing media, mixing genres. She would say, she'd like read me an Emily Dickinson poem, and then she'd say, okay, let's go to the art store. You're going to pick out stuff that's going to let you turn that poem into a piece of art, right? Or she'd say, we're reading a book. Let's figure out what they would have eaten in the book and have that for dinner, right? So to me, I was always engaging with words together with other things, whether they be visual or like tactile or edible. And so to me, I think that's why my writing takes such weird forms and shapes and things like that. So I think that's where I'll leave the origin story. I think that's that made Wow. That just really, man, wow.
Alice is cool. I'm like, write a book, Mom. Write a book about the parenting.
I met you, and you and your mom it was at least close to the time where you had released
Soul Food Love.
Soul Food.
Yeah,
Soul Food Love. And you know, when you meet people, this happens to me quite often. You know, you meet people, you meet them in a certain context, and you file them away in that context, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, Caroline and Alice, they have this book. It's about soul food.
Yeah.
They are a great mother-daughter combo, and they are into helping the world and, you know, sharing our people's heritage, but also their family's heritage through this food, and that's really cool. And then every time I would see you, it wouldn't fit it would not fit that, right? You know what I mean? Every next time I would see you, it would be something completely different. And then I think what really took it over the top was when I went to opening night.
Oh, for Lucy. I love it.
For Lucy. So I haven't gotten a chance to tell you this in person. I sent you like IG messages, but I knew you were getting a bunch of them. So I was like, I'll just add to the chorus. But A, that's one of the best shows I've ever seen in my entire life.
Thank you so much.
And B, I can't believe I know someone who created it.
That's gonna
and
make me
C,
cry.
I can't believe I know someone who created it and then performed it. D, who then on a stage with many, many, many really talented people was, for me, the best person on stage. Kind of crazy.
Oh my
Kind of
gosh.
crazy. So
Thank you.
I mean, it honestly, I don't know. It just put things in perspective for me around mastery.
Yeah.
You
oh
know,
my gosh.
you've that night for me, you had obviously done the work prior to that. You know, people will say things like, "You're a natural." No, you're a master, right? You know what I mean? You've done the work.
Yeah.
You've put in the work to be able to execute something at that level. And it's not just your memorization and the quality of your writing. That was incredible collaboration. There's a lot of business work that had to go in there.
Yeah,
There's a
that's
lot
right.
of narrative work. That's not the narrative you're telling the audience. The narrative you're telling everybody that's
Around
working
it,
on this
yeah.
thing, the people who are raising funds for it, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like,
You know these things, yeah.
I do know these things. I do know these things. And I am looking at this and I'm saying, you've got to be kidding me. This is something, and look, I worked on bringing a pro team to Nashville. So, like,
Yeah.
I understand big things.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's different levels.
Yeah.
There's different levels. I would say what you did with Lucy was another level. I don't know many people who are on that level. I really don't. I don't know many people who are on that level. I mean it. I mean it, and I think most people who like are in our circles would have to agree, right? You know, it's just, we know people who've written books. We know people who've done things, created great companies. That was a different level. So now that I've finally gotten to tell you that, I mean, what do you want to tell me or anyone who's watching this or listening to this about Lucy? Like who is Lucy?
Ooh, okay. So,
and if that's not even the right question,
no, it is. It is.
Like,
I'm
that's
processing
okay
all
too.
of the things that you said because it's very, you know, the show has been celebrated, and I think privately, you know, it's funny. After opening night, I sat down with Paul Vasterling, who's the, you know, he was the choreographer, but he's so much more than that.
He heads the ballet,
Nashville
right?
Ballet. Yeah. So he's
okay.
And he is the creative director of the ballet. He is, you know, does all of the fundraising. I mean, he's the anchor of that institution.
Get it.
And we sat down and I said, I feel like we just had a baby together.
Yeah.
You know, it was not just like, oh, like, congratulations, opening night. It was like, that was a lot of effort. That was like a lot of multivitamins, a lot of doctor's visits, a lot of like planning, a lot of like, you know, all of the, like, as you said, it takes a lot more than just the narrative that you're telling on stage. It's all of the stories you tell. It's all of the avenues that you have to try and go down to get to your specific goal. It's like you have plan A. There's no plan B. But you have infinite ways to get to plan A if you're resourceful, right? Like you have 1 to infinity ways to get to A, because we're not doing B, right?
Right.
And Paul was like a sort of relentless collaborator with me in that. And I think, you know, in creative space, because it's intellectual capital, thinking about capital, things like that again, creative space can be so tense and fraught because you're like, oh God, somebody got my idea. And so now you can feel very precious or jealous with your ideas and projects and output. And it can be frightening to collaborate. And I think this was just so not that. And and it really taught me, like, I don't want to do projects alone anymore. I want to find ways to do things with other people I think are excellent, who have skill sets I don't have, and then rise together. Do you know?
Yeah.
And I think, and what was really interesting is it's a real, I mean, Rhiannon Giddens is,
oh my gosh, I just can't even,
an artist of the highest order, and like,
absolutely
in every part of music,
absolutely,
right?
Yes.
And for her to be, you know, everyone was so humble, but to watch her just let my words do work while she's doing work, and to just be, you know, sort of relentlessly excellent and so kind and so willing to be like humble and share space with me and with Kayla. That's the way that something like that is able to happen. And it just felt like the whole thing had so little ego, but so much like, such high investment.
Yeah.
And that was really extraordinary. And you have to be able to trust that everyone is coming there with that.
Right.
And that we all can really, you know, tell this story together. And of course, and Kayla Rouser just throwing all of her whole body and narrative and mind into being that part.
Yes.
And so that leads me to who is Lucy? You know, there's the practical historical truth of who Lucy was. There was a black woman, or likely a black woman. There's a small chance that she wasn't, but we're pretty sure she was a woman of African descent, who was a brothel owner in London during the time that Shakespeare was working and living and writing.
Yep.
So that is just true. Black Luce, she's all up in the prison records. She was never arrested because she was a badass, again. But she's in the prison records because people kept getting arrested at her establishments, such and such, apprehended at Black Luce's, leaving Black Luce's, going into Black Luce's, X, Y, and Z. So, you know, the sort of central question of my project is, was this the woman that Shakespeare wrote his Dark Lady poems about?
Okay.
And we'll never know the actual answer to that question.
Right.
But, you know, the last 37, maybe you don't know this, but you do because you saw my show, but I'll repeat it. The last 37 of Shakespeare's sonnets are devoted to what history calls the Dark Lady, right? Because he says things like, "Then will I swear that beauty herself is black, and all they foul that thy complexion lack." Or, "Thy black is fairest in my judgment's place." Or, he calls her a woman colored ill. He says, "If hairs be wires, black wires grow from her head." Right?
Yeah, that was
right. It's
that was
very
heavy.
convincing,
That was heavy.
right?
Yeah.
It's very convincing.
Yeah.
So,
that was, I mean, you're taking me back to the show,
right? And you think to yourself, if there's a chance that it's a black girl, it gets to reframe how I'm reading all of this.
Yeah.
And so I went back to the poems, and I was like, I get to see myself in these.
Yep.
And so that's where it leads me to it. Lucy is this woman, but she's also the idea of being seen in the canon, right?
Yeah.
Which, you know, some people would say fuck the canon, and that's fine. But I think that because so much of the ideology and fundamental,
it's the basis of too much stuff.
Yeah, and so it's uplifting to see us already there.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
right.
we always were there.
That's right.
And we've always been. It's we were already, you know, we've always been here. You know, we built this, black people, and by we, I mean black people.
Yeah, right.
We built this country, but to not be erased or not be implicitly there, you know, the White House exists because there were slaves to build it,
right.
but that's an implicit presence.
Yeah, right.
But you know, the idea of black people being named and celebrated, right? Thy black is fairest in my judgment's place, right?
Yes.
That it's that it's just in there,
Yeah.
and that kids are already being taught it, and that we can go to it and see ourselves in it now. That's a revelation.
Are you the first person in the academic, because people may not know this, but you're also a professor, right? And so are you the first person in academia to really see this and move it down a trail, or is there, do you have contemporaries in this?
That's a complicated question to answer.
Okay. I'm glad I asked it though.
No, I'm glad you asked it. Can I, how long do we have? I could blather on about this forever, but
you can say whatever you want to say, and you can stop at the point where you think you're going to cause injury. But
no, there's no injury.
Okay.
I think so. The how I got to this book, I just finished Teach for America in the Mississippi Delta, which is how I realized I needed to be a poet, right? Because the things that I witnessed, the good and the hard, made me feel like I needed to bear witness and just sink my roots further into this Southern life that I'm choosing. And so I got my MFA at the University of Mississippi, and I just started my MFA. And in August of 2012, the Daily Mail, which, as again I point out in the book, is one of Britain's more disreputable newspapers,
yes,
but whatever. I read it every day because it brings me pleasure.
It's funny.
Right.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm reading the Daily Mail, and I come across this article entitled, "Was Bard's Lady a Woman of Ill Repute?" And I was like, ooh, Bard, Shakespeare, woman of ill repute, prostitute, how exciting.
Yeah, right.
So I click on this article, and it leads me to it's this small discussion. It's not a long article about some research being done by a gentleman called Duncan Salkeld, who's a professor of English at the University of Chichester. And he was the one who'd sort of found evidence in these prison records that he's been transcribing that Shakespeare and Black Luce were probably in the same place at the same time, and with some real evidence for that.
Okay.
And that had never been found before.
Okay.
There had never been. So there have been scholars in the past. There's a guy called G.H. White. And now the other book that I'm thinking of is eluding me right now. But there have been a handful of scholars over time who have posited that maybe Black Luce was the Dark Lady. But there are a few other candidates. And the sonnets, people have spent a lot of time thinking about who the fair youth was.
Yeah,
and I think
that was another incredible character.
It's amazing, right?
It's
Because there's so much representation that happens in the show.
It's unbelievable.
The love triangle.
When you understand what's actually happening, you're just like,
it's amazing.
Shakespeare?
Right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But and people have posited about that and the homosexual undertones, and there's so much sort of, there are so many sort of queer thematic things going on in so many Shakespeare plays, right?
Yep, for sure.
And and even down to if you think about in Twelfth Night or All's Well That Ends Well, we have, in Shakespeare's day, it would have been a young man playing a young woman, right? So it'd be a young man playing a young woman who's dressing up as a man and then accidentally falling in love with a man while he's dressed as, right? So that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So we have that already exists in Shakespeare, but all of that, back to Dr. Salkeld, he had found this evidence that Shakespeare and Black Luce were probably definitely in the same room together.
Hold on, this was in the book.
Yeah,
this is in the show too, right?
Well, a little bit of it.
I feel like I'm remembering that name.
Yeah, Dr. Dr. Salkeld. The show has a very abridged version of this part of it.
It's early
in the
it's
very
quick.
beginning of the book. It's when I come out, I sort of give a prologue, and
it's
when people don't even know it's happening.
Yeah.
That's
right. You're trying to orient to
it's
everything
when
that's
I saw
going
Hamilton,
on.
and the first time I didn't even know what I was going to see. My jaw drops to the floor, and it's Leslie, brilliant goddess Tony played Aaron Burr, Leslie Odom Jr. He comes out, how does a bastard orphan son of a whore, all this, and you miss all of the biographical details because you're so shook,
right?
And then you just have to go listen to the soundtrack 30 more times.
Yes,
I feel like that's sort of the prologue But anyway, I go visit Dr. Salkeld. He shows me these prison records. I'm tripping. And so there are people that have done research in the past about trying to figure out who the Dark Lady is. There are a few candidates. There's a woman called Amelia Lanier. There's another woman called, like, I'm going to get her name wrong, so I'm not going to even try and posit it right now. But there are a handful of people that have been posited. And the luxury to me of being a creative academic, so having my MFA, is that I can just make the leap. I don't have to substantiate it.
I was about to go there. It's like, you're talking about these people who are historians. They're trying to like get it right. And you're like, what if? Yeah,
exactly. That's sort of said to myself, and I say this in interviews sometimes, but it's like, it's just a true thing and a joke. It's sort of like, I love the Daily Mail. You know, what's his name? Randall Wallace, the dude who, was on, the American dude who was on family vacation in Scotland, saw a statue of William Wallace, who was his, like, however distant ancestor, and was like, I'm just going to write Braveheart, you know?
Right.
And just decide that all this shit went down.
Right.
Like, and he just could.
Yeah.
Because, like, you can have these, like, wild acts of imagination. And the fact that there is room both in Shakespeare's text and within the historical details for my conjecture to be a valid one is awesome.
Yeah, it really is.
Right? And so that's sort of like where I say, there's a lot of really honorable and more concrete scholarship around finding the Dark Lady, but I'd found her for me. Mm-hmm. I found her for me, so I made a decision about it. And that's a luxury I have as a poet, as opposed to a more straightforward academic, that I can just make that leap. But it's anchored in these other people's wonderful research, and Dr. Salkeld, who was so supportive about the show and so generous with his time and letting me come and see his research and see the prison records and actually hold them in my hands is amazing.
But before I get into tactical, practical stuff, because I've got some real questions about that, can you just take a second and talk about the creative process, the friendship, the sisterhood between you, Rhiannon, and Kayla, right? Because I think one of the very, very clear things that came out in the show is that you three were acting as one.
Yeah.
It was three people.
Good. Yay. Yes.
One representing music, one representing spoken word, one representing body movement, all personifying the Dark Lady.
Yeah.
Right. And so talk to me about what was that like? Because the first time I ever saw Rhiannon again was on stage at the Americana Music Awards 2 years ago.
Gosh.
And I was like,
floored.
Who the fuck is that?
Right.
Are you kidding me? Like, everything else was like really good and also just kind of okay next to her, right? And so when I heard you were doing this with her, I was just like, yo, Caroline is not playing around. Not playing around, right? Not playing around. So just what was that like?
Okay. So this story, talk about origin stories. This story actually begins in summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college, would have been 2007. The story begins in 2007.
Wow. Okay.
Rhiannon was 29. I was 19. I was an intern for 35 Sound Studio. It's a musical. Gilly Roswell is a music director, and he was, and it speaks to his bona fides and wonderful wokeness that he was the, music director for The Great Debaters. Denzel directed and acted in.
Right.
And that was a show that besides Gilly, I think almost every other principal, crew member, the Denzel hired as many people of color as he possibly could for that show, from costume directors, all the things. And then, but Gilly, he asked Gilly to do the music. And the reason I got that internship is because Gilly and my mom had worked on a movie, even further back in time.
Okay.
But so I wound up getting this internship with 35 Sound, and I got to go on location to Shreveport, Louisiana, for some of the filming of the movie. And it was during the week that Gilly was actually coming down to shoot because, you know, like he can source the music from from LA, but they had to be on set because he had gotten Sharon Jones.
Okay.
And then the Carolina Chocolate Drops.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Very much rest in peace.
Yeah.
But he gotten Sharon Jones and the Carolina Chocolate Drops.
Incredible. And
Alvin Youngblood Taylor to come be in the movie for this Duke joint scene.
Okay. That sounds ridiculous.
Right. It was ridiculous.
That sounds ridiculous, yeah.
So they built this juke in the swamp on the Texas-Louisiana border.
Oh
so we
gosh.
filmed in the middle of the night every night for like 4 days.
And how old are you?
19,
you're 19?
19 years old, right? Okay. I remember
Your
there was
life
a guy.
Is like really ridiculous.
It's bonkers. Remember there was some guy on set that kept on like sort of leering at me and singing that song. 19 years old, got ways just like a baby child. But anyway, so I'm sitting on this set, and Rhiannon is this sort of like luminous spirit. And she lets me like sit in her trailer with her in the air conditioning with all the mosquitoes, and she's like telling me about her life. And you know, the chocolate drops are just taking off then, and you know, she's just figuring out like the Sankofa strings thing. It's sort of dissolved, and I just sort of looked at her and I was like, "Let me follow you. Like, I want to follow this."
Mm-hmm.
Because at the time, I was sort of having this weird heartbreak that I thought that I was going to be an actress. And like that was my bread and butter from when I was a little girl. Like the first time I memorized a Shakespeare monologue was at Shakespeare acting camp at Cheekwood when I was 9 here in Nashville. Okay. And then I did the Apprentice Company with Nashville Shakespeare Festival. I like, you know, studied, I went to acting school in London in high school. And then I was in the Shakespeare acting school at the Stratford Shakespeare Festival in Canada. Like I wanted to be a Shakespearean actress.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, my family was like, you have to go to real college, not conservatory. I said, okay. And then I didn't really figure out how to engage in a way that made sense to me with the theater community at Harvard. And maybe that was like my acting wasn't working there or whatever it was. It just didn't make sense. So at that time, I was just having had a first year of not being in a play, really. And I was like, how do we figure out how to keep our dreams alive in different versions? Remember, like, keep the plan A, but have different angles,
right? Yeah,
right?
Yes.
So I still wanted to find my way back to the stage. I still wanted to, like, write my way in, still want to tell stories. And so I'm watching Rhiannon, who's, like, 29 and living her dream. You know, and she, like, had a, you know, meandering path to, she was not a banjo player before. You know, she, like, learned strings, like, way after. She went to conservatory to sing.
Yeah.
And so I'm watching her and wanting to be her at 19 years old. And she's 29, and then we lose touch. But I always like sort of followed her career and was like so excited for her, and you know, did my own thing. Wound up in Mississippi and writing poems, and really feeling so far from the stage at points. And then the cookbook comes out, and like then there's some questions about is there a cooking show and all of these things, and then. There's just so many ways that things have to happen to come together. So Holly Gleason, who's an amazing music journalist who's based here in Nashville, I'm sure you've met Holly.
Yeah, did she write for The Scene?
She has written for The Scene.
Tennessean.
Holly's written everywhere.
I was about to say, I keep
Holly's
seeing her
amazing.
name in bylines. Okay, yeah.
Rolling Stone, I mean everywhere.
Yeah, Rolling Stone, yep, okay.
And so Holly came to me and asked me if I wanted to write an essay for this book that she was editing and that she also has a piece in. The book's called Women Walk the Line, and it's women writers writing about women in country music.
Oh, wow.
And so she asked me if I wanted to write...
Which by the way, is a revolutionary statement in itself.
Exactly.
You know about country music, right?
No, exactly.
Like that's...
And so she asked me to write an article, and she said I could write about whoever I wanted, and I said, well, can I write about Rhiannon Giddens? Right? And so I, like, start this piece about Rhiannon.
Wow.
And, you know, right about that same time, Paul Vasterling has read Lucy Negro and has asked me if I would have a meeting with him. And I'd never met Paul before. And so
You're kidding.
It's like there's so many kismet, serendipitous things that came together for this to work. Like Lucy needed to be born. She wanted to be born. It's inevitable.
Absolutely.
But, like, it's also just a ton of hard work in many directions. And this, like, sort of relentless pursuit of one goal, which is, like, get back to stage, write your way in. And so I'm like, you know, I tried it from the poetry angle, tried it from teaching and, like, the bearing witness angle, the cooking, the TV, like, the music. Like, they all came together.
Yeah.
But so I sit down with Paul, and he's like, I want to turn your book into a ballet. And I was like, and he said, what do you think? I said, oh my God, I never would have thought of that, but great. And then we sort of get on like a house on fire. And then he says, okay, so just reach for the stars. Who is your dream person to do the music? We're in Nashville. Who's your dream? You know where this is going.
Yeah.
So I said, well, if it's a woman, I would like it to be Rhiannon Giddens. If it's a man, I would like it to be Jack White. Because, there's the black girl thing, the white male thing with the Shakespeare, and then like
both of those make complete sense
and
for
I've
the
been
story.
listening to a ton of raconteurs when I was writing the book, which is crazy, like separate from, and a lot of Lil Wayne too, and like a lot of crazy stuff in my book. But I said if it's a woman, Rhiannon, if it's a man, Jack White. And so, who published the new edition of my book? Third Man, Jack's book publishing company published the book. Rhiannon did the music. So it was just sort of this extraordinary thing of just like speaking things into existence, like willing them, hunting them down. And then the book comes out, the Woman Walk the Line book comes out, and that sort of facilitated conversations with like reopening conversations with Rhiannon, which was sort of just such a happy accident.
Yeah.
And then she just said, yes, she originally
was that easy to re?
Yes, and it was not easy, but it was, it was easy, but not simple.
Yeah.
If that, like, sometimes I more often have to say, like, it was simple, but not easy.
Right,
it's like
right.
getting to the top of the mountain is simple. You keep walking up.
That's
it's
right.
not easy,
That's
right? Like,
that's right.
But this one was easy, but not simple in the sense that, like, we had to sort of, like, Mom wound up at a book party that I wasn't able to attend for Women Walk the Line. She sees Rhiannon there. She's like, oh, my daughter wrote about your thing, and Rhiannon's like, oh, I remember you. I remember her. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm playing a show at the Symphony Hall. You guys should come. It's like in a couple weeks.
Uh-huh.
So then Mom and I just go, we just go to see Rhiannon, and so it's easy, right?
Yeah.
It's easy.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
running the cocktail
yeah.
party. It's easy. And so then
but
we
not
went
straightforward.
to, no, not at all. No, not simple. So we go to her show. Mom texts Rhiannon and says, do y'all want dinner after the show? Like, and so we get like barbecue sandwiches and have some red wine at my parents' apartment downtown. And then I'm like, meanwhile, texting Paul, because he is so good for like the sell. You want somebody to close a deal, like you get Paul Vacheling in the room. So I was like, Paul, like, get over here. Like, you talk her into doing this music for the show, like right now. So Rhiannon's like, we're hanging. Paul comes over and he's like talking about the ballet, and Rhiannon's so into it. And she's just like getting her MacArthur Genius Grant, but she's such a visionary that she's like, this is why when I can do small things, small, weird, cool things, because I have the cushion, as opposed to some people who would say, I got this grant, this is beneath me now, right? But again, that just comes from this, like, the synergy, the humility, the, like, level of investment in telling these stories of other people.
Yeah.
So long story short, Paul talks her into doing one song, and then we're sort of working together, and then finally, she just says, we sort of say, well, why don't you just do the whole thing? And she's like, yeah. So that just happened that way. And none of this would have happened if Kayla Rouser hadn't been at Nashville Ballet doing the work that she's been doing sort of exquisitely for years before. Because Paul, when he read my book, he saw her.
He saw her, yes.
He read my book and he saw her.
I got that when you said that he called you. I was like, he saw this for her.
He read my book and he saw her, right? And I think it's this extraordinary thing of, and the more I understand about the dance world and how complicated it is, and I mean, and it's like any other, space where, you want to be, I remember thinking I want to play Juliet, and I'm excited to be Black Juliet, but I want to be Juliet.
Yeah, right.
And so there's like, you want race to matter in the sense that you want to be kicking down doors, but you want it to not matter, that you want what you've done to stand
on its merit.
On its merit. And I think that Kayla's career up to this point, or up to the point of Lucy, had been very much about establishing her objective excellence.
Yes.
Without consideration for race.
Yep.
And I think that having this show, watching her inhabit the role and do the, like, really in some ways, I think the most radically challenging work of all. I mean, like, I remember going to the first rehearsal where I was actually saying my poems instead of instead of the recordings, I made a recording of them so that they could have rehearsal and I didn't have to be there for everything. And, you know, watching Kayla dance to, like, and the company, Paul does an amazing job with diversity, but, like, watching her be the only Black woman in the room, and Imani's also in the room. She's just promoted to full member of the company. Yay!
Congrats, Imani.
We love you, girl. Congratulations. But watching Kayla dance with, like, very much a white gaze on her to words where I say the idea of her warm brown body, long stretching. Under his hands is a righteous want. She's become another way to talk about skin. You know, the world-heavy mule of her born line by line down the page, right? Or, like, Lucy Negro is the Black aesthetic writ large across a whitewashed riverside brick, right? Like, watching Kayla just dance to that as, like, a Black body almost alone in a very white space, and knowing that she'd been doing that, like, every day.
Was there catharsis in that?
Well, I think it was. For me, it was. I felt very proud of her, and I felt, like, really full of admiration. I didn't know that that's what I was asking her to do.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, because that's a thing.
Things change in hindsight, but I mean, as you're saying this to me, it feels like, oh, somebody wrote a poem that is mapping, even if it wasn't for me, it certainly
and I think
speaks to my experience.
Yeah, and I think, I'm watching Kayla find who Lucy is to her. Yeah, because, like, you know, the Black experience is not a monolith, right?
Definitely not.
And Rhiannon and I, in some ways, because I grew up in the music industry, and, like, you know, we sort of have. We have a more shared background of, like, how we occupy Black space and quirky and Kayla's journey to Lucy just, like, one, made me so full of, again, admiration for her, but then also deepened my understanding of what I hoped the book could do, because I really meant it when I said I want it to be for every person who's ever felt othered. Yeah. And I wanted us all to all the way be Lucy. And so for Lucy to all the way make sense to her, and, like, how that we were going to, you know, structure the libretto so that Lucy's narrative is one that makes Kayla feel like she's got the power. How we talk about making sure that the choreography, Kayla is a tiny human, right? And Owen Thorne, who danced Shakespeare beautifully, is a gigantic man, you know? And Nicholas,
he really is.
Yeah, and Nicholas Scheuer is also a formidable man, like the fair youth. And so thinking about, like, how do we make sure that this woman's got all the power on stage? Like, how do we,
she had it.
Right? And she did.
Had it.
She has it in her face and in her presence, but also it's, like, making choices about choreography.
Yeah. It was energetically
about,
in
like,
the movement.
When Rhiannon and I are, like, reinforcing her, you know, like, how we make sure that always is the structure. And Caleb, and, like, us being able to have those conversations as the show was unfolding and the choreography was happening, and the poems were getting chosen and fitting in here and there. That was just a really extraordinary thing to figure out all of the ways to make sure Lucy had all of her power and all of her say. And that was always a conversation, and it always happened best, like, you know, like, I wrote the book. Paul and I sat down and wrote the libretto, which for the most part, the narrative structure remained, and we, like, took poems, we, like, put a bunch of poems in. At one point, the document was, like, 25 pages, and then we cut it down to 13, and then it, like, I think grew back to 22 or 23 by the show. I think, like, that sort of, like, that back and forth, that growth, that happened all most authentically when we were all in the room. When Kayla was dancing and having her say, Rhiannon was playing, and, like, we were sort of vibing off of each other. I was going, well, we really might need a line here to, like, reinforce what's going on in Lucy's head and, like, give the audience enough of an anchor, because they're not watching an angry Black woman. They're watching, like, a strong, empowered woman who's dealing with a man who's not coming through with the things that he's supposed to. Yeah. And, you know, like, and that's a different thing than just watching someone get angry who you expect to get angry, right?
Yeah, right.
You know, like, so that was that was amazing.
Okay. We're gonna shift. We could talk about Lucy a lot more.
No, I'm delighted to shift.
By the way, let me ask you a question. Have you? This is just context for me. I mean, the show was covered by the New York Times.
Right.
You know, how much media did you do around the show?
So we actually, the ballet has like hired in a really amazing team to make sure that Lucy got her right light shown on her.
Yeah, it happened.
And we did a press push in New York. We sat down with Tariro, the woman who wrote. So it actually 2 articles in the New York Times.
I remember this. I remember this.
And we sat down with Tariro first, and she was amazing and so engaged and invested in the story and wrote her beautiful piece, the What If I Told You That Shakespeare's Had a Black Girlfriend or whatever. Not whatever, but I can't remember the title right now exactly. And then Margaret Renkel wrote her beautiful review that was in Nashville, Beauty Herself is Black, or like a Nashville Miracle. And it was kind of amazing, right?
What a headline.
What a crazy thing. I mean, I wept. I was like,
what a headline.
How is this a thing, right? So there was an intentional press push, and it did the work it needed to do, very much so. And we sat down with Dance Magazine. We sat down with, now we did sit down with Town and Country, and they didn't get it enough to do a piece on it, but that's okay.
That's okay. I think that's fine.
But,
I think that's fine.
But the hope is, and now it's sort of like, and because the press was effective enough, I think we're gonna take it to Manhattan either in late 2020 or early 2021.
Okay.
Which will be amazing.
Yes. I knew that was happening.
And hopefully some further traveling after that. But yeah, they did. There was an intentional press push. The Siegenthaler team did that, and that's sort of the joy of this city, is that you're never. Everywhere you turn, there is art, and everywhere you turn, there are patrons of the art that are not that want to do work for art because of for its own sake, and because there's a meaningful connection to, like, there's a meaningful social, emotional, personal connection to the institutions that make and support art in this town.
Yep.
So
yep.
I think that was a big gift.
Okay, so Des, how are we doing on time? Okay, great. This is a good time. Talk to me about the principles by which you live your life. But that could be broad, right? So I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. That enable you to be such a strong creative person. You know, like what? Because there are certain characteristics that your work just exemplifies, right? So there's a tremendous amount of courage. There's a very high level of quality, you know, and there's all sorts of things about art being interpreted and, you know, beauty being the eye of the beholder. But I think there is also some objective reality about a piece of work that just comes in at a level of quality that everyone has to say, whether you like it or not, that is high quality work, right? And so, you know, the courage, the quality of the work, the space to allow these things to come to you. You know, I think some people's lives are so cluttered that, you know, you talked about this easy, not simple thing, right? And some of that, just what I heard in there was you had the space to allow serendipity to happen, right? Yep. What are the principles that you live by that allow that to happen? Okay. The space to allow serendipity, you know, when I think about that story I was telling from, you know, my mom working on the set of, you know, this movie with Gilly, like back in the day, to, you know, my heartbreak over my, you know, acting not being a thing at that moment, although I did find my way back to the stage, didn't I? You did. But, and then, you know, fighting to find some other space, you know. So one of the principles is keep plan A and use your infinite options. I'm walking with that one. That's a really important one for me. And, you know, another thing my mom always says is that success breeds success, right? And so, but that circles back to this keep plan A and use your infinite options, because, you know, I found a way to be good at writing poems. Like, I didn't figure out
The acting thing, I knew that was a goal. I knew that getting back on stage, finding my way back to a Shakespearean stage was a goal, right? But I'm like, I'm not getting cast in things at Harvard. I haven't figured this out, so I'm going to write poems. I'm going to get really good at it. So I wrote poems. I graduated with my thesis, got magna cum laude, and it was graded by Amy Hempel, who's like, one of the great American, short story writers of ever. And Jory Graham, who's the first woman to win a Pulitzer Prize for poetry, graded my undergraduate thesis and gave it magna cum laude. Not summa, but that's okay. Magna's good. I'm happy. And so good. I wrote those poems, and that was a success. And then I got into Teach for America, another success. Completing my 2 years in the Delta and finding my way, realizing that I needed to do the witness bearing of writing about that. Success, right? Like, it's fighting, and then those all eventually come together. The cookbook gives me space, like the advance for the cookbook, the learning how to tell stories, learning how to do press, learning how to present myself in Southern spaces and Black spaces and translate narratives that are non-traditional into new forms. Like, the cookbook gave me a much bigger platform and allowed people to take me seriously as a published writer, right? So then when Lucy's coming out, I already have some context in the publishing world, right? So all of these things, in some ways it felt, in moments, I sort of knew that I always had, I knew I always had the goal of writing my way in to the spaces I wanted to be in, to getting back to the stage, getting back in front of audiences and getting to tell stories verbally and presently and not just on the page. But it sometimes felt like a winding road, and like when you said you met me and you said, what are all these different things? It's it can feel very kaleidoscopic or very patchworked, but it was all toward this goal, and I was like, I'm just going to keep on doing things that I can do excellently. Because if they all speak to me and they all come from me, then they all will come together, and when that narrative finally assembles, it's going to be some kind of magic that only I could have done, right? And so success breeds success, infinite ways to plan A. A third one, and this is going to be familiar to anyone raised by anyone who was ever old and Black, is, my great-grandfather, who was Edmund Pettus's child, who never learned how to read and write because his father didn't want him to, but did have a car, strangely. His dad was like, I'll pay for it. Anyway, my grandfather said, my great-grandfather used to say, well, do you want this thing? Like, white people have this thing, do you want it too? And if the answer is yes, then just work 3 times as hard and have what you want. And it's not fair, but that doesn't really matter. Like, do you want it or not, right?
Is what it is.
It is what it is, and then, get it and then change the system from above, right? But the work 3 times as hard and have what you want principle is one that has been really valuable to me, because it stops you from saying, oh, it's unfair, because it's already fucking unfair, we know that. So what are you going to do about it? And there are parts of my life where I'm like, well, this is unfair, and I'm not fighting for it.
Right.
I'm not fighting to have thigh gap. It's too hard.
I'm opting out of that one.
It's too hard. I was not born with, streamlined white genetics or, glorious Kenyan ones or whatever. Whatever, body type. I'm not prepared to work 3 times as hard and have that, even though I want it. I'm just not,
Yes.
But there are things that I am prepared to work 3 times as hard and have what I want. And complaining about the fairness or not, I'm just grateful I have the ability to work 3 times harder than some people. Because that's valuable. And then I think the last one that maybe not the last one, but I'm riffing here.
This is good. This is really good.
Have a day job that matters to me. So this is actually 2. There are 2 more. One, having a day job that feels like it has integrity and value. So for me, that's been teaching. And because teaching, even when you're full-time teaching, I was never able to write when I was teaching in the Delta during the time that school was in. But the thing about teaching is that you do get long vacations. And so I never took a break. Vacation was not vacation, it was writing time.
Yeah.
So I was doing 2 jobs. I was just crunching all of my writing into summer and Thanksgiving and, and Christmas and all of those things.
Yep.
But having a day job that mattered to me was really important to me. And I admire people who choose to have a day job that doesn't take up space so that they can do their art alongside. Like if you're a waitress or you're working retail and that gives you mental room to like write your screenplay or record your album, that also is very valuable. But for me, the teaching informs my writing, so that was really precious to me. And then the last one is this is a phrase that I learned from a dear friend who was in the Army. Saturate, incubate, eliminate as a way of making like a battle plan or procedure, right? Which I like. I wish I could like trademark, but can I trademark that? I'm trademarking it.
I have no idea, but it
you
sounds
can't
pretty
steal
good.
it. We have it recorded. You can't steal it. Anybody who tries to steal it, we're going to pull up this podcast. This shit's mine. I'm working on a memoir. Saturate, incubate, eliminate. Like you saturate yourself with information.
Yeah. In. Yeah. Take.
You incubate, so you just have to sit on it. Yep. You have to sit on it. And then you eliminate. You cut away the stuff that you don't need in order to proceed, right?
Yes.
And so to me, that's very much my writing process. Like I know people who sit down every day and write. I don't. I like take in the world. I take in the news. I take in my friends. I like, throw dinner parties and like, have conversations that inspire and stimulate me. And then like I wander around my house and reorganize my closet and I clean my bathroom and I plant a garden, like I'm incubating.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sit down and I write once I'm ready. Once the saturation and the incubation process have happened and I can eliminate the words that I don't need, the narrative strands I don't need to tell a story.
Yeah.
That process, understanding that is a process, has been really valuable for me because I think as a millennial, as a citizen of the world in the 21st century, as an American, we're overworked and underproductive.
Yes.
And I think knowing that I'm saturating and incubating and celebrating those parts of my process is so important to me because I think it can look like procrastination or laziness or decadence, which maybe it is a bit decadent, and that's intentional. That part I'm good with.
Yep.
But I think that knowing that like when I'm sitting in my house like wanting to just like water my plants, that isn't me avoiding my work. That's me saying I'm still in my incubation period because when the thing is ready to come, it comes, and like knowing my process and not being self reproachful about the time that my brain takes to generate the art that it wants to make.
Mm-hmm.
That has been like a radical shift in like my joy in the writing process because I haven't been any less productive. I've just enjoyed my time that I'm not writing more, and actually like done more fruitful things with my home and with my like, social life and, things like that. So
that's super insightful. And that, all of the things, so I love the plan A. I love the plan A piece. Can I just reflect a little bit?
Yeah, go,
so
please.
I love the plan A piece because, one thing I've been observing lately in the world, I'm a creative and I'm working more on creating from a writing perspective, but a lot of my stuff is around innovation, right?
Yeah.
And if you're an innovator, I think, which you are as well, right? And this is why I think the plan A thing is so striking for me, is you don't pay undue reverence to strategies and tactics that are just appropriate for a window of time. They're not timeless wisdom, right? You know what I mean? There are, as you said, infinite ways to get to your plan A, right? And I think just that understanding, because I think so many people don't have that understanding, right? They pay too much reverence to protocols.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And you have to get less literal. You know, like if your plan A if my plan A had just remained, I want to be a member of the Royal Shakespeare Company.
Right.
There are limited ways to get to that plan A. But you have to figure out like what is the core of this dream? Like what is the nature of this dream? Like, is it that you want to be on stage no matter what? Is it that you want to tell Shakespeare stories no matter what? Is it that you want your voice heard and that you want to feel seen all the time no matter or some intersection of those things, and like figure out what the actual concern is and not like the literal job title.
Yeah.
is, and that. But I think, and people have trouble, doing the critical analysis, the reading between the lines, the explication of the text, as opposed to just like the literal word, the decoding.
I completely agree, and I think that dovetails very nicely with your last principle: saturate, incubate, eliminate, because you've allowed for that incubation time to be part of the process as opposed to an avoidance to the process, right? And that is a paradigm shift, right? The people that it's like you're not giving your subconscious any credit, right? You know what I mean? Like,
for real, it's
a thing, and it's working, and it will work on your behalf if you just get the fuck out the way for a second, right?
That's right. You wouldn't bake a cake and be like, why isn't it done?
Right.
It's like you mix it all together, and then you just are like, oh, well, it's not cooked. Well, no shit, you didn't leave it in the oven long enough. That's a thing.
Yes. Okay, this was as good as I thought it was going to be.
Yay! That was amazing.
Is there anything you have not said that you wanted to say?
Gosh, I probably have said more than I ought to have said. It would be my...
Fantastic.
Thank you. I'm so glad you thought of me. I'm so grateful to get to have conversations like this as part of my dream making. Yeah,
you're one of my... You're in my friend circle of people who I'm sort of like, how am I friends with that person?
Back at you.
She's like,
they put you on the wall at the airport.
She's like ridiculous. Whatever. I'll tell you that story sometime. Okay, so where can people find you and what you're doing right now? And you're like kind of on tour, like you're doing like poetry tours, like.
I don't even.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, people can find me. My website, but that's about to be updated.
Okay.
It's about to be updated, but you can find me on my website, but you can find me on Instagram, Caro Randall Will.
Okay.
And you can find me...
And Des, you'll put that on the screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
You're asking him, not me.
Yeah.
You can also find me, now that I'm full-time at Vanderbilt, I'm on the MHS website as writer-in-residence. But I think I'm reading a poem... I'm reading some poems at Pilgrimage Festival.
Dope.
But that's not till September. I don't think I have any official readings on the books, but Third Man always comes up with fun things to do. So also just follow the Third Man books and Third Man Records pages, because they always are creating amazing platforms for their authors to speak. I just read at the Third Man shop in Detroit a couple weeks ago, and that was fire. It was really fire.
It's so dope that you're working with Third Man too.
I'm so grateful. Like I said, speak your dreams into existence. Speak them into existence.
It's amazing. It's amazing. All right.
Thank you.
Caroline, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
this was amazing.
Absolute pleasure. And until next time, peace.